While I've reviewed Goblin Slayer in the past, I recently decided to rewatch it again because season two is finally coming out, and I hadn't seen the movie either, so I figured I'd rewatch it. Also, it's been a couple of years since I reviewed it last. It's been a couple of years since I watched it. Maybe my tastes have changed. Maybe it's better than I remember it being. Maybe it's not as good as I remember it being. I do obviously have good memories of it because I did include it on my list of anime recommendations for people who don't watch anime. So obviously, I saw something in it. So the first time I watched this show by myself, I liked it a lot. I watched it again with some friends, and that was a really enjoyable experience. And this time again, I watched it with a friend, and I gotta say, it's a show that I think gets better every time I watch. I think I've gained a new level of appreciation for it because I've watched a lot more anime on a regular basis than like more seasonal stuff since this first came out. And Goblin Slayer is an example of what I like to call Isekai, an anime with Isekai characteristics. That is, we all know what Isekai is. The Japanese or person from our world gets sucked into a video game or another world or something like that, and there's magic or sci-fi elements or something like that. It's kind of a fish out of water story. Animes with isekai characteristics are things that take place in like an RPG game, or the world that you're in is very obviously some sort of RPG. Stuff like banished from Hero's Party, I decided to start a new life on the countryside, or I'm quitting heroing. Um, there's all kinds of stuff like that. Just anything where the main character is not isekai from our world. There's even one I recall. I think it was the strongest sage with the weakest quest or something like that, where he like isekai'd himself into his own world by like reincarnating himself. You also have stuff like its Cell World and things that have like an MMORPG component to it. It's just technically not isekai because they don't get sucked into another world, but there is a video game that functions as another world. And Goblin Slayer, I think, solidly fits in this category because it very obviously takes place in an RPG. Now, what makes it so unique and something I really appreciate about it now more than I did in the past is it doesn't take place in a video game RPG, it takes place in a pen and paper RPG. Very clearly, it takes place in a D&D game that is heavily inspired by, I'd say, Lord of the Rings and Berserk. And it just leads to like a very different feel to it, very different way in terms of like the power levels of people, how the magic system works. You have like spells per day and stuff like that. Just character behavior is different. It's nice to see something that tried to do something a little bit different. Well, in a lot of ways, it is kind of similar to other stuff. Like as I said, the fact that it's based on pen and paper RPG, I think does make it stand out. And the more you kind of think about that while watching it, you really get a good handle on it. Before we get into talking about the show itself, though, I would recommend if you can and you're going to watch this, firstly watch the dub because the voice acting is really good. Goblin Slayer's deadpan, I think, really makes a lot of the jokes. But also, if you can, I'd recommend watching this with a friend. This is a show. Some other shows I kind of find like this are maybe Welcome to the NHK, Rent a Girlfriend. It's the kind of show that's maybe good to watch with someone. In this case, just because it's like it's fun to have a friend with to like look at and go, what the hell did Goblin Slayer just say? What just happened? Like what is that? And just kind of laugh along with like the gags that they have in the show. Well, the extremely dark comedy, a bit like how something like Rent a Girlfriend is unwatchable by yourself, but if you're watching with a friend and you're making fun of it together, it's amazing. Now, this show is good on its own, but it's even better if you're watching it with someone else. So, what is Goblin Slayer? I've rambled on for like 5 minutes about some background. So Goblin Slayer very obviously takes place in a D&D game. The characters don't know they're in a D&D game, though. And this is made clear, like in the opening song, they say it's time to roll your D20. They constantly talk about dice, that the gods are like players, that the gods fight with each other. There's a supreme god who I'm pretty sure is supposed to be the DM. But you have all like the classes from D&D, and it's kind of like been extrapolated to the logical extreme of how like particularly early D&D went. So like people aren't referred to by names. I don't know if anyone in this show actually has a name. They might have names and they just don't tell each other them. But everyone goes by either their class or their race or social status in class. So you have Goblin Slayer, Priestess, High Elf Archer, Lizard Priest, Dwarf Shaman, and then you also have Guild Girl because she's a receptionist at the guild, Sword Maiden, etc. Spearman, which basically everybody just has their name like. And it's just kind of such a kind of a fun throwback to like when you're making a D&D campaign or something like, oh, who's going to be the fighter, who's going to be the tank, who's going to be that kind of thing, and there's a certain degree of charm to it. Now our main character Goblin Slayer is an interesting mixture. I can't tell if he's like he has severe autism or PTSD or like he's schizo or all three of these combined together into someone who is truly a Sigma. I think there's a very good chance that the Goblin Slayer is a Sigma male. There's a bunch of memes about that on Reddit. I saw like Sigma grind set and stuff like that. And I know I said Reddit, but I typed Goblin Slayer Sigma male, and that was the first that popped up on Google. So Goblin Slayer came from a peasant village. When he was a kid, his entire village was killed by goblins who I believe raped and killed his sister in front of him. He was the only survivor, and he was so deeply traumatized by that, he vowed to spend the rest of his life fighting goblins. He got trained by, I forget what their race is called, Araya, Reyes. I think they're kind of like, they kind of look like goblins, but they're more, I think they're supposed to be like halfling, like hobbits or something like that. But he trained him from a young age to be like a super skilled goblin slayer. And Goblin Slayer is just monomaniacal when it comes to killing goblins. Nothing else matters in his life. He lives on a farm with Cowgirl, who is a childhood friend. And basically, he spends all his time and money just preparing to kill goblins and going on quests to kill goblins. And everything about him is optimized for that express purpose. His armor is specifically designed to cover certain parts of his body that like goblins try to attack. It provides a lot of mobility. He deliberately uses short, cheap swords because he expects to break them, and he predominantly is fighting in caves. He uses a metal shield with I'm not sure if you call it a targe, but it's a core part of his kit. And he just expects his armor to break a lot, and he has to repair it a lot. One of the funny things about him is he never takes his helmet off because he believes that if he ever takes it off, then and a goblin attacks him from behind, they're going to be able to knock him out, and there's nothing he can do about it. So, like, there's always a big question over what does Goblin Slayer actually look like, and all kinds of people have theories about it. It's not even that he has any kind of taboo or doesn't want people to see his face. He just doesn't take his helmet off because he's scared. Obviously, he does take it off a couple times, and you can only kind of see the outline of his face. But he's very good looking. In particular, a nice touch is his skin is extremely pale because he's always wearing armor and he's always in caves, and he always basically is active around night. And just the rest of his stuff is optimized for that. So he has like special poisons that work against goblins. He has explosives. He has stuff like I think something like Molotov cocktails. In one episode, because he doesn't really have any magic powers other than his supernatural ability to defy dice rolls by the gods, he's very much an int fighter, and that's something I always find interesting is when the main character relies very heavily on their wits, their knowledge, and pre-planning rather than just blowing through everything with power. I like that as well, but I also like it a lot when you have a main character who wins by being smart. I actually think I found the class that Goblin Slayer would be, which is Warblade, which is a 3.5 edition class from I think it was the Tome of Battle or whatever the Martial class expansion was. That is a basically it has like a D12. It's a barbarian variant that is very heavily based on intelligence and weapon skills. And I kind of feel like Goblin Slayer probably would apply to that because the dude's almost indestructible. But he has a reputation. What's kind of funny is, despite being a hero, people do not think very highly of him. Basically, everybody at the guild thinks he's a crazy psycho. That he's either kind of like a serial killer who could snap at any day and go out and just kill everybody, or he's just like autistic or schizophrenic or something. Also, he doesn't clean his armor because it's smelling like goblins means it's harder for goblins to find him when he's sneaking through their caves. So he smells bad. He's unsociable. He tends to answer in one words. He can't read social cues, and he only will do quests related to goblins. Now, in this world, goblins, as in D&D, are very low-level enemies. They're regarded as being basically complete jokes. Most quests to kill goblins, there's like 3 or 4 of them that are attacking a village. Any low-level adventurer can take care of it. In this series, you have ranks going from porcelain to gold. I think there's a platinum adventurer. Yeah, there is. The hero's platinum. I think there's one platinum adventurer in the series. There's like 2 or 3 golds, and then there's silvers, and there's very few of those. There's probably maybe a dozen in the kingdom where it takes place in. And Goblin Slayer, despite being only taking goblin related quests, is somehow a silver ranked adventurer. That is, he is one of the highest ranked adventurers in the land, and people kind of think it's weird because he wears crappy, like grimy armor. He constantly breaks his swords. He'll only fight goblins. He doesn't have a party. He's super antisocial, and he's kind of an enigma to a lot of people. So what happens with a lot of new adventurers, and Guild Girl, who's the receptionist that kind of runs the local branch of the guild that gives out quests, is a lot of new adventurers go on quests to hunt goblins, and they'll go and attack a goblin cave, and they'll turn out to be more than just a couple of goblins, and there might be a goblin shaman or a goblin champion or a hobgoblin or something else that low-level low-level characters can't handle, and they will get party wiped. And this happens frequently, and Guild Girl keeps trying to tell the new adventurers not to do that. And she kind of develops. Goblin Slayer has like a whole harem of women who love him because his Sigma male grind set, his autism, his ability to kill goblins like no one else can, arouses the women around him. But he's either oblivious to it or he's just too much of a Sigma male to really care. But Guild Girl's in love with him because he does the job that no one else can. He does the dirty jobs. He kills the goblins. And every time he cleans out a goblin nest, that's a party of adventurers that don't get wiped. And in the first episode, which was very controversial, Priestess joins a party of amateur adventurers who go to try to clean out a nest of goblins. And they initially are doing well, and they're just kind of making fun of the goblins. But then the goblins just savagely attack them. Some people get like eaten. There's rape. It's like super violent. And then Goblin Slayer comes in and he just slaughters everything in his path. One of his habits is he counts the number of goblins he kills. And we get this super edgy scene where there's a bunch of like baby goblins that he burns alive. He's like, there's not a single reason to leave them alive. Goblins will learn like rats. If you let them go, then they'll just learn from the experience and they'll come back evolved and stronger. They also hold a grudge. We have to kill all of the goblins, including the children. And that's just kind of the thing whenever there's like, he just has to kill every goblin in his path. And he winds up saving Priestess and one of her party, although the party member he saves is catatonic because she got violently raped by goblins. Apparently, there are no female goblins, and goblins can only reproduce by raping women of other humanoid species. So basically, goblins are this massive threat that are extremely dangerous and have the capacity to devastate parts of the world, but they no one really takes them seriously. They won't deploy the army to deal with them. They just basically throw cannon fodder adventurers in to try to keep them at bay. And if the cannon fodder adventurers die, no one really cares. They're kept in check by Goblin Slayer. Because Goblin Slayer, he can't be with High Elf Archer, he can't be with Priestess, he can't be with Guild Girl because he's married to his job. He's like the Punisher, but for Goblin. And you know who he reminds me a lot of is Eren Yeager. And I want to see a buddy cop film starring with Eren Yeager and Goblin Slayer. It's like, I'll help you kill Titans, only if you help me kill goblins. And they team up together, and they're like goblins that get injected with spinal fluid, and then you get like Titan goblins, and they have to like team up together to take them down because they're both like extremely determined spurgs who are willing to do anything to achieve their goals. And Goblin Slayer's character is just really enjoyable because of his autism. Like there's one scene that always really cracks me up where someone's like some people are talking about goblins, and then he goes over and he says to High Elf Archer, "Are you a goblin?" Like completely serious, even though she very clearly isn't. She's just like, "No, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Okay, if it's not goblins, I'm not interested." And he just tends to act that way. And there's a part where it's like where Priestess is trying to teach him like basic social skills, and she's like, it's not a discussion unless both sides have a say. And he's like, I'll try to remember that for next time. But just basically, whenever like someone says anything, it's like, what are we going to do tonight, Pinky? The same thing we do. We're going to do tonight, Brain. The same thing we do every night. Go and kill goblins. But Goblin Slayer also undergoes quite a bit of character development over the course of season 1. After he saves Priestess, Priestess kind of clings to him like a lost duckling, and he teaches her how to be an adventurer, how to stay alive, and she wants to help him out in protecting people from goblins. Eventually, there's a party that comes to seek Goblin Slayer's help with a major goblin-related quest, that being High Elf Archer, Dwarf Shaman, and Lizard Priest. And we kind of see a bit of a thawing of Goblin Slayer. He now has friends. It takes them a while to kind of get used to being around them, but he has friends. He started to open up just a little bit more. He maybe can speak in more than a couple of words. And there's a lot of just great banter scenes that go on. There's some good Lord of the Rings references. Dwarf Shaman calls him Beard Cutter, and High Elf Archer calls him Orc Bolg, which I believe are both goblin slaying swords from Lord of the Rings. Dwarf Shaman's a lot of fun. He basically just drinks constantly and gets into does banter with High Elf Archer. I actually like High Elf Archer quite a bit. She was an elven princess who left the forest to pursue a life of adventure because she was bored with it. And she kind of has a character arc too, where she kind of learns being an adventurer isn't all fun and games. And she kind of, similar to Priestess, develops a lot of respect for Goblin Slayer in the way he approaches things so methodically, in the way that he kind of takes the world seriously. And she, like every other female in this character in this show, develops a crush on him. So I like High Elf Archer quite a bit. I like Dwarf Shaman quite a bit. Lizard Priest is funny because he's like dresses like a Native American, and his dream is to someday become a dragon. And for all of his spells, like the words that he uses are prayers to dinosaurs, like Blessed Iguanodon or Brontosaurus or something like that. And Priestess functions as kind of the party's morality pet and also the kind of the straight man to it who's always like, what is everybody else doing? So Goblin Slayer is kind of a series of different arcs that have consistent progress, where we have Goblin Slayer and Priestess, and the rest of the party comes in, and we have a an arc where they go to Watertown, and we get to meet Sword Maiden, who is, well, she's Sword Maiden. I mean, she's Sword Maiden. Enough said. And she is the chief priestess of the supreme god. Um, and she, like, her past is she was a gold ranked adventurer, but she got kidnapped and raped repeatedly by goblins who also permanently damaged her eyesight. So she's more afraid of any goblins than anything else. And so Goblin Slayer is kind of the ideal man for her because he's good at killing goblins. And we get like the greatest Sigma male pickup line of all time, where Goblin Slayer is like, I'll always kill goblins for you, even in your dreams. It's like, yes, you will. And so she's also part of Goblin Slayer's harem. He's not really able to understand it though. He just knows that she's this woman who hates goblins as much as he does, and he respects that. And then we kind of end the season one with a goblin lord showing up, and our heroes have to band together with the local adventurers to fight off the goblin lord. And we kind of see Goblin Slayer's character arc come full circle. He's gotten a lot better than he was at the beginning of the season. He talks about how he's happy to have friends, how he wants to see the world as an adventurer. Obviously, still killing goblins. That's still a priority one. Yeah, they actually come across demons at like an ogre at one point. It's like, what the fuck's an ogre? What's a demon? I don't care about you. I just care about fighting goblins. He's fighting an ogre, and he's like, I don't even care what you are. You're just some fucking ogre. I'm more scared of the average goblin. And then the ogre gets really pissed off that he doesn't know who he is. But basically, Goblin Slayer's party comes to help him. All the other adventurers come to help him. Goblin Slayer plans out this big siege, and or big plan, and they're able to defeat the Goblin Lord and all the Goblin champions. And he finally has kind of earned the respect that he deserves. People still think he's a spurg. People still think that he's like schizo posts. But people get like now that he is a very talented adventurer in his own right. He might not have flashy armor or magic or a giant like enchanted sword, but when it comes to someone who's able to make plans, do preparations, prepare on the fly, can't beat him. So I guess what I'm saying is he's Batman. And I kept saying when I was watching this, I'm Goblin Slayer. I think he says that a number of times. It's like, I'm going to stop you. Do you know why? Why? Because I'm the Goblin Slayer. And he says that a couple of times. Now, to touch on the movie The Goblin Crown, or Goblin's Crown, or whatever it's called, the movie I thought was pretty bad. The first issue, and this is why I often don't watch anime movies, the first like third of it is literally just a recap of the series. And as I had just watched the series, I didn't see why that was necessary. Like to have something that was as long as a normal episode recap for a show that's only 13 episodes. So the actual movie is like the length of 2 episodes, and it's okay. It's like it feels like a below average Goblin Slayer 2-parter. It just feels, I don't know, it just feels kind of forced. It's like we have to put a Goblin Slayer movie out there. Let's have them go north because that worked with the first Naruto movie. So we're just gonna have them go north. There's gonna be a Goblin Paladin. We're gonna have the Chaos God. We're gonna throw all this other random stuff in. I think it was an adaptation of like I think they had some material left over from one of the light novels that they needed to wrap up before, so they decided to insert it here. But on the whole, I just thought the movie was not very good. I don't think it lived up to the quality of the series. Now, granted, I might have just been irritated because I had sat there for half an hour watching a crummy clip show, and maybe that impacted my enjoyment of the actual film. And that the film was, as such as it was at 1 hour, was basically about the same quality as a normal couple of episodes. But it just made me wish I was watching the normal show rather than the OVA. I generally speaking do not like OVAs because they do feel like try hard versions of a normal episode. Like they don't feel like an actual cinematic movie. They don't really feel like anything special. It's just like they took a couple episodes, edited them together, gave it really weird pacing and slightly higher production values. And that's what you wound up getting. So that's Goblin Slayer. It is an extremely dark fantasy, very heavily based off of Lord of the Rings and Berserk, I would say. I'll say now, and I probably should put warnings ahead of time. It is very gory and very violent. There is a couple of rape scenes, and there is a couple scenes where Priestess pees herself. It's not a sexual thing. It's because the goblins are like about to rape her, and she's just extremely afraid. So I don't know if you want to count that as like some sort of weird sexual thing. I don't think the show portrays it that way. I think it's just that the show's trying to somewhat realistically show what being an adventurer would actually be like and all the shit that comes along with that and how easy it is to die or get maimed for life or stuff like that. This show also just has a ton of fan service. Or not a ton. It has, I'd say it kind of has, when it has fan service, it has pretty hard fan service, but it doesn't take up too much of the show. Like they'll go pretty far with it, but it might be like 5% of the show if that. Whereas with like Code Geass, it's like 20 to 25% is just fan service. And this is, I think, a lot more self-aware about the fan service. And part of it is some of the time it's put in there as kind of like a form of dark. This show has a lot of dark humor in terms of just being something that's like laugh out loud funny. I would say it's kind of hard to find something that's funnier than Goblin Slayer. That's something that you can really just kind of laugh at his schizo antics, the insane shit he says. And like I said, it's why I think it's something good to watch with somebody else to sit down and just be like, what is this dude talking about? And this is, I think, probably the funniest anime series I've ever seen. It is very much a laugh out loud funny thing. And when I watch this, I just kind of burst out laughing from just the dark humor, Goblin Slayer's jokes, the interactions of the other characters. This is definitely one of the best ones. I might give this show like a 9 out of 10, to be honest. I don't have any particular complaints about it. Um, I guess you could argue some of the quests are a little bit repetitive, but overall, like I can recommend Goblin Slayer to pretty much anybody, so long as you're not too scandalized by violence and a little bit of nudity and a lot of attractive women with big boobs. Um, but yeah, so that's about it. That's a review of Goblin Slayer. God bless everybody. May the dice rolls ever be in your favor.